Rachel Martinez pushed through the glass doors of Cliffside Athletic at exactly 6:23 a.m. Her janitor's cartwheels squeaking against the polished concrete floor. The sound echoed through the empty gym like a broken metronome, announcing her presence to no one who cared to listen. Cliffside was to gyms pretending to be one. The front half gleamed with boutique locker rooms, LED-lit mirrors taller than most people, and a smoothie bar that charged $15 for protein shakes. Members here wore matching athleisure sets and took more selfies than they threw punches. The back half told a different story: cracked leather-heavy bags, blood-stained mats, and fighters who taped their hands with whatever they could afford. Rachel belonged to neither world. She was the invisible woman who made both spaces possible. Her grey janitor's uniform hung loose on her small frame, faded from countless washes. Navy work pants pulled slightly at her ankles, and her white sneakers had seen better year. Soles cracked, sides worn smooth. A blue sweatshirt stayed knotted around her waist like armor she never planned to wear. Her employee badge bounced against her leg with each step. First name only, Rachel Staff. She'd been cleaning Cliffside for 8 months now, ever since the renovation split the gym into its current form. The pay was decent, the hours suited her schedule, and most importantly, nobody bothered her. She arrived before the chaos, left after the noise died down, and spent her days moving like a ghost between two worlds that barely acknowledged her existence. The morning routine never changed. First, she flipped the breakers near the supply closet, watching the overhead lights blink to life with electronic hiccups. The cleaning cart rolled forward with its familiar grinding sound, one wheel slightly bent from the day a trainer had backed into it while texting. She'd never mentioned it to management. Some things weren't worth the conversation. By 6:40, the first round was complete. Towel bins swapped, mirrors sprayed, windows cracked for circulation. The gym still smelled of yesterday's effort-lingering sweat, mixed with her own lemon-scented floor cleaner. Her footsteps echoed differently in the empty space, each click of her badge against her hip, marking time in the hollow quiet. She moved methodically through her territory. The boutique section came first, wiping down equipment that stayed cleaner than most people's kitchens, restocking towels that rarely got used, adjusting dumbbells that spent more time as photo props than training tools. The real gym waited. In the back, where the work was harder but somehow more honest. The ring stood in the center of it all, ropes slightly slack, canvas marked with chalk dust and the ghost stains of old blood. She cleaned it with careful figure eights, always clockwise, a habit she couldn't explain but never questioned. The floor mats around it were scuffed and streaked, flecked with dried sweat that hadn't dried right the night before. At 7:15, the first members trickled in. The fitness crowd arrived with glass water bottles and wireless earbuds, claiming treadmills like reserved seating. Then came the younger boxers, earnest and half awake, dragging gear bags across the tile. She moved around them all, lifting buckets and sorting hand wraps, present but unseen. 2 trainers arrived together, Brandon Murphy, the junior coach, whose voice carried too much volume, and Tony Reeves, the veteran who kept his words close to his chest. They passed her cart without acknowledgement, discussing weekend fights and training schedules. She was part of the landscape now, as permanent and unremarkable as the water fountain or the posted rules nobody read. By 7:40, she was replacing the towel stack under the ring, a small detail that bugged her every morning. The bin always sagged after the first training session, and she'd learned to stay ahead of the problem. She ducked under the ropes, careful to keep low, and dragged the fresh stack into position. That's when someone noticed her, didn't know. Janitorial worked ringside now, came a voice from behind her. She looked up to see Marcus Grant stretching near the edge of the mat. 6'2", built like a comic book character, with the kind of confidence that filled rooms before he entered them. He was Cliffside's weekend warrior, the guy who'd turned 6 amateur wins into a personality. His towel landed in the corner with casual arrogance. Rachel didn't respond. She finished positioning the towels and backed out from under the ropes, but not before she caught the ripple of chuckles spreading through the early crowd. A woman, filling her shaker bottle at the water station, glanced over with mild curiosity. Kyle Henderson at the front desk raised his eyebrows for half a second before returning to his phone. She said nothing, rolling her cart one step back, then to the side, parking it behind the nearest pillar. The clock above the ring hung slightly crooked, another detail nobody else seemed to notice. 8:12 a.m., she had 3 minutes before the floor would be too crowded to finish mopping. That's when Brandon called out, loud enough for the treadmill runners to hear. If she's done sanitizing the ring, maybe we should let her run laps around it. It wasn't mean, exactly. It was the kind of casual dismissal that Cliffside specialized in, jokes aimed low, meant to land easy. A few fighters laughed. Someone nudged their workout partner. Phones started appearing, screens lighting up like eager eyes. Rachel kept working, sorting towels and checking bins. She'd heard worse. But something about the morning felt different, charged with an energy she couldn't name. The jokes bounced from wall to wall, gathering momentum. "Careful, Marcus," someone called from the back corner. "She might teach you something about cleaning house." More laughter, more phones. The energy in the room shifted, becoming something that demanded an audience. Rachel could feel it building. Like pressure before a storm, she finished wiping the ring's edge and stood, towel in hand. For just a moment, she looked at the crowd, really looked at them. Young fighters hungry for content. Trainers ready for entertainment. Members hoping for a story to tell later. None of them knew her name. None of them had asked, but they were about to learn both. Marcus Grant loved an audience almost as much as he loved the sound of his own voice. By 8:30 a.m., he had both. Word of the cleaning lady situation had spread through Cliffside's group chats, and the morning crowd was thicker than usual. Phones were out, recording everything from multiple angles. "Come on, Rachel Wright," Marcus said, reading her badge. From across the ring, his gloves hung loose around his neck like a trophy. "You've been staring at this ring for months. Don't tell me you haven't thought about it." Rachel continued wiping down the corner pad, her movements steady and unhurried. She'd learned long ago that silence could be its own kind of power, but the crowd was getting restless. Someone near the heavy bags called out, "Maybe she thinks she's part of the program up your way to muscle. Cliffside's new cardio class," another voice added. "First you clean the sweat, then you earn it." The laughter built like a wave, phones angling for better shots. A fitness influencer with 40,000 followers had claimed the bench near the water cooler, already crafting her caption. Brandon Murphy, the junior coach, leaned over the ropes with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Hey, relax," Brandon called to Marcus. "Let her finish disinfecting your ego first." More laughs from the crowd, but Marcus didn't flinch. If anything, the attention energized him. "I'm serious, give her gloves. One round, it's Friday morning. Let's entertain the troops." Brandon chuckled, but he didn't say no. The gym's energy had shifted into something electric, expectant. Even Tony Reeves, the veteran trainer who usually stayed out of the drama, had moved closer to watch. Rachel stopped cleaning. For the first time all morning, she looked directly at Marcus. Her eyes were calm, focused, but there was something else. There's something that made the room's chatter fade for just a moment. "Well," Marcus spread his arms theatrically. "Mop girls got hands, or just handles." The crowd erupted. Someone started chanting, mop girl," while others laughed and filmed. Kyle at the front desk walked over with a dry erase marker. Tilting the sparring schedule whiteboard, name he asked, pen hovering. "Just put janitor," someone called out. "It's shorter." Kyle scrawled it on the board. Sparring schedule, 12:20 p.m., Marcus versus janitor. Rachel watched him write it, her expression unreadable. Then she turned, walked to her cart, and reached beneath the towel bin. Her gloves emerged from a side. Pocket-worn leather, fingers darkened where they'd rubbed thin, straps that had been retied 100 times. The sight of them changed everything. The chatter died as she walked back toward the ring. These weren't borrowed gloves or equipment, grabbed from the lost and these were personal, used, broken in by someone who knew what they were for. Marcus bounced in place, rolling his shoulders. "I'll go easy, he announced to his audience. Don't want her quitting halfway through. That floor won't mop itself. A few more phones came out. The fitness influencer leaned toward her friend and whispered, "She doesn't actually think this is real, does she?" Her friend laughed, lifting her own phone. "It'll be over quick. Blink and you'll miss it." Someone near the punching bags had found an actual bell knot, the electronic timer they used for official bouts, but an old brass one that gave a satisfying clang. They rang it once, just for effect, and the sound cut through the air like a countdown. Brandon tossed Marcus's mouthguard and leaned over the ropes again. "You want a mouthpiece too?" he asked Rachel with a smirk. "Not that you'll need it long." Rachel stepped into the ring silently, head down, no fanfare. Her badge still hung from her waistband, her sleeves rolled once at the wrist. She set her gloves on the canvas, knelt beside them, and started wrapping her hands. The process was methodical, precise. She worked without looking up, fingers moving through the familiar ritual with muscle memory that spoke of countless repetitions. The crowd grew quieter as they watched, some unconscious recognition stirring that this wasn't the fumbling amateur show they'd expected. $10, says she bails before the round starts. One of the trainees muttered. 15 says she's down in under 20 seconds. Another replied. Someone nearby unwrapped a protein bar, already settling in for the show. Marcus's crew lined the ropes, offering friendly trash talk. Try not to hit her too hard. Champ might lose your gym discount. Tell her to aim for your mop instead of your jaw. The sign posted next to the whiteboard read nitrogen monoxide sparring without coach clearance in bold red letters. Nobody seemed to care. This wasn't sparring, this was entertainment. Rachel finished, taping her wrists, pulled on her gloves, and stood slowly. Her eyes found Marcus once, a brief assessment that made his grin waver for just a second. She adjusted the strap on her right glove with a single, practiced tug, then walked to her corner. No smile, no trash talk. No acknowledgement of the crowd now pressed 3D ep around the ring. She just waited, gloves resting at her waist, feet planted in a stance that looked casual but felt centered. The bell, rankling, sharp, definitive. Marcus stepped forward with a bounce in his knees and theatrical confidence. He rolled his shoulders, threw a light jab at the air, and turned a slow circle for his audience. Someone clapped. Someone else whooped. A phone chimed as another recording started. Rachel didn't move. She stood in her corner, completely still. Watching Marcus perform for the crowd, her breathing was even, her shoulders loose without being slack. When he finally turned his attention back to her, stepping closer with that same predatory grin, something in the air shifted. "All right," Marcus called out, half laughing. "We dancing or cleaning today?" He threw a lazy jab toward her chest knot meant to hurt, just to get things started. A play gesture for the cameras. Rachel wasn't there when it arrived. One step, left weight flowing like water, and Marcus's glove found empty air. The crowd chuckled, but the sound was different, now less certain. "Show her the broomstick combo." Someone shouted from the dumbbell rack. Marcus threw two more punches, a jab, and a cross with more intention behind them. Again, Rachel wasn't there. Her back foot pivoted, her body shifted, and Marcus's combinations hit nothing but space. Brandon leaned over the ropes, his smirk still in place but his eyes more focused. Got to punch where she's going, not where she was yesterday. More laughter rippled through the gym, but phones were steadier now, following Rachel's movement with the careful attention usually reserved for actual fighters. Someone near the front desk muttered, "She's not even trying to throw back." "Yeah, 'cause she doesn't know how," came the reply. But Marcus was starting to breathe harder. 3 combinations, all misses, and the woman in the janitor's uniform was making him look like an amateur. He stepped in closer, tapped his gloves together with forced confidence. "Come on," he said, "louder now, you're just making me look good." He dropped low for a hook, with real intention behind it. Rachel rolled under it clean, her movement so smooth it looked choreographed. Marcus's glove swept through empty air while she emerged on his blindside, already reset, already waiting. One of the veteran coaches paused mid-conversation and turned toward the ring. The laughter was getting quieter, not silent, not yet, but uncertain. Rachel shifted left, her eyes locked on Marcus's chest, reading his breathing, his weight distribution, the tells that came before every punch. A clipboard trainer near the heavy bags leaned forward, his expression shifting from amusement to something more focused. "Wait," he said under his breath. Marcus tried again, faster this time, throwing a right cross with enough power to make a statement. Rachel ducked and spun off the line, his glove brushing past her shoulder as she moved to safety. The crowd was definitely quieter now. Someone near the mirrors whispered, "She's not just dodging, she's reading him." The clipboard trainer nodded. Barely audible, "That's not beginner stuff, that's drilled." Marcus's theatrical grin was gone now, replaced by something harder, more serious. He was supposed to be dominating this, supposed to be putting on a show. Instead, he was chasing shadows while the cleaning lady made him look like he'd never seen a boxing ring. He stepped in with real aggression now, shoulder forward, building a combination that would end this embarrassment. But Rachel was already moving, her weight shifting, her body coiling not with tension, but with perfect balance. Marcus wound up for his best shot. Rachel struck first. One punch, a tight hook, flat and fast, aimed just below his ribs. It landed with a sound that didn't echo a deep, final thud that seemed to absorb all the noise in the gym. Marcus stopped, his hands dropped, his face went pale as he staggered once, then folded at the waist, and dropped to his knees, clutching his side and gasping for air that wouldn't come. The phones lowered. The gym fell silent. And Rachel Martinez stepped back to her corner, as calm as if she'd just finished mopping the floor. The silence stretched like a held breath. Marcus Grant remained on his knees in the center of the ring, one hand pressed against his ribs, his face the color of old newspaper. His breathing came in shallow gasps, each exhale visible in the gym's cool air. Nobody moved. The phones that had been eager to capture his victory now hung useless at their owners' sides. Even the front desk monitor continued playing its upbeat playlist, but the music felt obscene against the stillness. Tony Reeves, the veteran trainer, was already climbing through the ropes, one hand raised in a stay-back gesture. He'd seen enough fights to know when someone was really hurt versus when they were just embarrassed. This was the former. "Don't touch him yet," Tony called to Brandon, who was hovering at the ring's edge with wide eyes. "She got him clean in the liver. He needs a minute." The words liver shot rippled through the crowd like a stone dropped in water. Suddenly, everyone was an expert, nodding knowingly while secretly Googling what that meant. But Rachel simply stood in her corner, gloves at her sides, waiting for someone else to take care of the situation she'd created. Marcus rolled slightly. Grimacing, the color still hadn't returned to his face, and his gloves rested limp against the canvas. Someone dropped their phone. It hit the mat with a soft plastic clap that seemed impossibly loud. "Is he going to be okay?" a woman asked from ringside, her voice small. Tony nodded without looking up from Marcus. "He'll live, but he's going to feel that for a while." He glanced toward Rachel, and for the first time since entering the ring, his expression held something like respect. That was surgical. A few people started backing away from the ropes, as if the violence might be contagious. The fitness influencer who'd been so eager to film earlier had already pocketed her phone and was quietly gathering her things. The entertainment value had evaporated the moment Marcus hit the canvas. Rachel peeled the tape from her wrists and tossed it into a nearby trash bin. Her movements were economical, unhurried, the actions of someone cleaning up after a job well done. She didn't address the crowd, didn't showboat, didn't even check on Marcus. She'd done what needed doing, and now she was moving on. That's when the front door opened. Coach Benjamin Torres stepped inside, keys still in hand, a coffee cup balanced in his other palm. He was the kind of man whose presence changed the temperature of a room not through volume or theatrics, but through the quiet weight of earned authority. At 62, he'd trained 3 professional champions and owned Cliffside Athletic for over 20 years. His boots clicked once on the concrete before he stopped, surveying the scene. His eyes went to the ring first, taking in Marcus on his knees and Tony crouched beside him. Then his gaze found Rachel, still standing in her corner with her untied gloves. For a moment, nothing moved. Then Ben's voice cut through the silence, not loud, but carrying the kind of weight that made everyone listen. "Is that Rachel Foster?" In my ring, the name hit the crowd like a physical blow. Everyone turned, not toward Ben, but toward Rachel. She didn't look up from her gloves, didn't acknowledge the sudden shift in attention. She was busy stuffing her hand wraps into a small gym bag that had appeared from somewhere in her cart. "Foster, not Martinez. Foster." "Wait," one of the younger coaches said, his voice uncertain. "Her name's what?" Ben kept walking toward the ring, his coffee forgotten. "Rachel Foster, southpaw. 3-time regional lightweight champion. Ran defensive drills in this building before half of you were throwing straight punches." A murmur went up along the walls. One of the trainees, still clutching his protein shaker, whispered, "No way. That can't be her." Ben pointed toward the far wall, behind the treadmill bay. "Go check the photo gallery over there." Back when this ring was held together with duct tape and the lights worked, maybe half the time, someone jogged over to the wall of faded photographs, the gym's history preserved behind cracked plastic and gathering dust. He stared at the images, his finger tracing across faces from another era. "Oh my God," he said quietly. "She's in the middle row, blue gloves, same eyes. That's her." Brandon stepped down from the ring apron, his earlier confidence replaced by something that looked like nausea. "I thought I didn't know. You didn't ask," Ben said simply. "You just looked at the uniform and decided who she was." Another coach crossed to examine the ring post, running his finger along the inside edge where the canvas met the frame. There, in faded black marker, barely visible after years of wear, was a signature in clean cursive script, R. Foster. The pieces were falling into place now, each revelation hitting like a follow-up punch. Rachel Foster, the woman who'd revolutionized women's boxing at the regional level. The fighter who'd retired undefeated but out of the spotlight, choosing to walk away at her peak rather than chase diminishing returns. The woman they'd been calling the mop girl for 8 months. Brandon swallowed hard. "We didn't know." "You knew enough to mock her," Ben replied, his voice quiet but edged with disappointment. "You knew enough to laugh. That's always easier than asking questions." Someone had turned off the playlist. The silence spread wider, heavier. Marcus was finally sitting up, Tony's hand on his shoulder, but his breathing was still labored, and his face hadn't regained its color. Rachel stepped out of the ring and walked past Ben without a word. She didn't offer instruction to the trainers helping Marcus, didn't acknowledge the crowd's stunned stares, didn't respond to the whispered apologies starting to ripple through the room. She simply collected her cart, checked that her supplies were secure, and continued her workday. Ben watched her go, then turned back to the assembled crowd. His voice was quieter now, but it carried to every corner of the gym. "She used to coach here. Before the renovation, before the sponsorship deals and merchandise displays. Back when you fought to get time on the mat, and you knew not to waste it." The silence deepened. Rachel was already back at work, wiping down equipment with the same methodical precision she'd shown in the ring. As if nothing had happened. As if she hadn't just shattered everyone's assumptions with a single, perfectly placed punch. "She didn't need to prove anything," Ben added, his eyes still following her progress across the gym floor. "And she still doesn't. But she had proven something, whether she'd intended to or not. She'd proven that strength doesn't always announce itself. That skill doesn't require validation from strangers. That sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one nobody bothers to see." Rachel Foster finished cleaning the dumbbell rack and moved on to the next section, her cartwheels squeaking their familiar rhythm. Behind her, Marcus was finally getting to his feet, supported by Tony and his own wounded pride. The gym would remember this morning for a long time, but Rachel was already thinking about tomorrow's cleaning schedule, and whether she'd need to order more floor cleaner before the weekend. Some habits after all, were harder to break than others. By the next morning, the story had spread beyond Cliffside's walls. Group chats buzzed with second-hand accounts. Social media posts appeared and disappeared as people tried to capture the moment without seeming exploitative. The fitness influencer who'd deleted her video was already regretting the decision. Her followers would have eaten up the authentic drama. But inside the gym, a different kind of reckoning was taking place. Rachel arrived at 6:23 a.m., same as always. Her cart squeaked the same rhythm down the polished concrete. Her badge bounced against her leg with familiar precision. If yesterday's revelation had affected her, it didn't show in her routine. She flipped the breakers, started her circuit, and began the day's work with the same methodical focus she'd always brought to the job. The difference was in everyone else. Brandon Murphy arrived 15 minutes earlier than usual, coffee in hand and something that might have been guilt weighing on his shoulders. He'd spent the previous evening researching Rachel Foster online, diving deep into a boxing career he'd somehow never heard of despite working at the gym where it had flourished. 3 regional championships, 15 professional wins, 0 losses, a defensive style so technically perfect that opponents often looked foolish trying to solve it. She'd retired at 28, citing a desire to step back while the sport was still beautiful to me. The interviews were sparse, she'd never been one for self. Brandon found her restocking towels near the heavy bags and cleared his throat. Rachel, I wanted to. She looked up from her work, towel stack balanced perfectly in her arms. Her expression was neutral, professional. She waited for him to continue. I owe you an apology, he said. Yesterday was unprofessional. I should have stopped it before it started. Rachel nodded once, a small acknowledgement that didn't quite reach acceptance. The towels by the women's locker room need replacing too, she said quietly. Then she continued past him, cartwheels, marking time. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't hostility either. It was the response of someone who'd learned not to expect much from apologies and had developed more practical concerns. Other conversations followed similar patterns throughout the morning. Gym members who'd laughed the loudest suddenly found reasons to speak to her asking about equipment locations. Commenting on the weather, offering awkward compliments about her impressive background, Rachel responded to each with polite efficiency, answering questions and accepting comments without encouraging longer exchanges. Marcus Grant didn't show up until Thursday. When he finally returned, moving carefully and favoring his left side, the gym went quiet in a different way. Not the electric silence of anticipation, but the muffled quiet of people pretending not to watch a car accident in slow motion. He'd clearly been thinking about that Monday morning, probably more than he'd wanted to. His usual swagger was replaced by something more cautious, more aware. He nodded to Rachel when their paths crossed near the front desk, a small gesture that acknowledged her presence as a person rather than a fixture. She nodded back. Nothing more, nothing less. But the real change wasn't in the individual interactions, it was in the gym's entire ecosystem. The ring schedule was posted more carefully now, with proper coach oversight noted for every session. The wall of boxing photos had been cleaned and reorganized, with Rachel's championship picture moved to a more prominent position. Someone had even added a small placard, R. Foster, Regional Lightweight Champion 2019 to 2022. Ben Torres had made sure of that. He'd also quietly updated the staff directory to include Rachel's full name and, in smaller print, former professional boxer. Not everyone deserved their privacy invaded, but some achievements were too significant to remain hidden. The fitness influencer, whose name was Jessica Chun, had written a lengthy Instagram post about assumptions and authentic strength. It was well-intentioned, even insightful, but Rachel had asked Ben to have it taken down. She didn't want to become a symbol or a cautionary tale. She just wanted to do her job. By Friday, a new routine had settled into place. People still trained, still pushed themselves, still occasionally made jokes. But there was an undercurrent of awareness now. A recognition that everyone in the building had their own story, their own skills, their own reasons for being there. Rachel noticed the changes. It was impossible not to, but she didn't comment on them. She continued, arriving at 6:23, continued her methodical cleaning circuits, continued treating everyone with the same professional courtesy she'd always maintained. The only difference was in her cart. Tucked beside the spray bottles and replacement towels, her gloves now traveled with her, not hidden in a side pocket, but visible enough that anyone paying attention would know she was ready for whatever came next. She didn't expect trouble. The gym had learned its lesson, and most of its members were good people who'd simply made assumptions without thinking. But Rachel Foster had spent years learning to be prepared for anything, and some habits were worth keeping. On Friday afternoon, as she finished her shift and prepared to leave, Ben Torres approached her near the back exit. "How are you doing with all this?" he asked, his voice carrying genuine concern. Rachel considered the question, her hand resting on the door handle. "It's different," she said finally. "But different isn't always bad. You thinking about coming back? To coaching, I mean?" "The offer's still open." She was quiet for a long moment, looking back at the gym where she'd once trained champions and now cleaned equipment. Two versions of the same space, two versions of herself, separated by years and choices that couldn't be undone. "Maybe," she said. "Let me think about it." Ben nodded. "Take all the time you need. The gym will be here when you decide." Rachel pushed through the door into the evening air, her cartwheels squeaking one last time as she headed toward the parking lot. Behind her, Cliffside Athletic hummed with its usual Friday energy, people pursuing their goals, testing their limits, working toward versions of themselves they hoped to become. She'd been all of those people at different times. Champion, teacher, invisible worker, keeping things running smoothly. Each role had taught her something different about strength, about recognition, about the gap between who people appeared to be and who they really were. Next week would bring new challenges, new interactions, new opportunities to surprise people, or blend into the background. Rachel Foster was ready for either possibility. After all, she'd been training for both her entire life. 3 weeks later, Rachel made her decision. It started, smaller comment here, a correction there, when she saw a young fighter throwing punches that would guarantee shoulder problems in 6 months. She mentioned it quietly while wiping down nearby equipment. When a trainer was struggling to explain defensive positioning to a frustrated student, she demonstrated the proper stance while restocking towels. The advice was always offered carefully, never forced. She'd learned the delicate balance between helping and overstepping, between sharing knowledge and claiming authority she hadn't been given. But word spread anyway. It always did, in a place like Cliffside. The cleaning lady noseboxing became Rachel actually coached here, which evolved into she used to train champions. The story grew more accurate with each telling, though it also grew more mythical. By the end of the month, some newer members thought she'd been a professional herself, which was true, and that she'd trained Olympic athletes, which wasn't. Let the rumors run their course without correction. People needed their stories, and as long as no one was getting hurt, she saw no reason to manage other people's narratives. The real change came on a Tuesday morning in October. She was finishing her usual circuit when she noticed a commotion near the ring. A woman in her early 20s was crying frustrated tears while her trainer, one of Cliffside's newer hires, shouted instructions that only made things worse. "Keep your hands up, no higher. You're dropping your guard every time you throw." The woman, whose name was Amanda Peterson, had been training for 3 months with little progress. She had natural athleticism and genuine determination, but her technique was a disaster. Her punches had no snap, her footwork looked like she was walking through mud, and her defensive positioning would get her hurt in any real sparring situation. Rachel watched for a few minutes, recognizing the problem. Immediately, Amanda wasn't dropping her guard on purpose, her shoulders were too tense, creating a chain reaction that pulled her hands out of position every time she committed to a punch. It was fixable, but not with shouting. "Try again," the trainer called. "And this time, keep those hands where they belong." Amanda threw another combination, her form deteriorating further as frustration mounted. Rachel could see the exact moment when the young woman's confidence cracked, when determination started shifting toward defeat. That's when Rachel made her choice. She parked her cart, walked to the ring, and quietly said, "Excuse me?" Both Amanda and her trainer stopped, turning toward the voice they hadn't expected to hear. Rachel was holding a pair of focus mitts she'd retrieved from her cart, the same mitts she'd used during her coaching years. Maintained and stored with her gloves. "May I?" she asked the trainer, whose name was Derek Collins. He was enthusiastic and completely out of his depth with technical instruction. Derek looked uncertain, but nodded. He'd heard the stories about Rachel, though he wasn't sure what to believe. But Amanda was clearly struggling, and he was running out of ideas. Rachel slipped on the mitts and positioned herself in front of Amanda. "Show me your jab," she said simply. Amanda threw a tentative punch, all the flaws on full display. Rachel caught it softly in the mitt, then stepped closer. "Your shoulders are carrying your stress," Rachel said quietly. "Every time you get ready to punch, you're bracing for failure. Let them drop." She demonstrated with her free hand, showing the difference between tense preparation and relaxed readiness. Loose shoulders, tight core. The power comes from your legs and hips, not from forcing your arms to work harder. Amanda tried again. Better, but still not right. "Here," Rachel said, adjusting Amanda's stance with gentle touch. "Your feet are too close together. You need a foundation that can handle the force you're creating." They worked for 10 minutes. Short combinations, basic defensive movements, nothing fancy. But Rachel's instructions were precise, patient, and immediately effective. Amanda's punches started snapping with real power. Her footwork became more fluid. Most importantly, her confidence began returning. A small crowd had gathered to watch, but Rachel ignored them. Her attention was completely focused on Amanda, on the micro adjustments that would build into major improvements over time. "Better," Rachel said as Amanda completed a clean 1-2 combination. "Much better. Practice that exact sequence 50 times tonight. Slow and controlled. Don't worry about power yet, focus on perfect form." Amanda was beaming now, sweat-drenched but energized. That felt completely different. "Why couldn't I feel that before?" "Because no one taught you how to feel it," Rachel replied. "Technique isn't magic, it's just information you haven't received yet." Derek had been watching with growing amazement and, if he was honest, a little embarrassment. In 10 minutes, Rachel had fixed problems he'd been struggling with for weeks. "Would you, ... he started, then stopped, unsure how to phrase the request. Rachel looked at him expectantly. "Would you be willing to work with some of my other students? I mean, if you have time. I know you have your regular job, but..." Rachel was quiet for a moment, considering. Around them, the morning crowd had grown larger, all pretending to focus on their own workouts while actually watching this unexpected development. "I'll think about it," she said finally, pulling off the focus mitts. "But if I do this, we do it right. Proper technique, proper progression, proper respect for the sport." Derek nodded eagerly. "Absolutely. Whatever you think is best." Rachel handed him back the mitts, but not before catching Amanda's eye. "Remember 50 perfect repetitions tonight. Not 49, not 51. Exactly 50, and every one has to be identical." Amanda nodded like she was receiving sacred instructions. In a way, she was. As Rachel returned to her cart, Ben Torres appeared beside her. He'd been watching from the gym office, where he'd been pretending to work on scheduling, while actually observing the impromptu lesson. "So," he said quietly, falling into step beside her. "Ready to make this official?" Rachel glanced back at Amanda, who was already practicing the combinations with Derek. Her form transformed. "What did you have in mind?" 2 mornings a week. Technical instruction for fighters who need it. Your rate, your rules, your students. The cleaning job stays exactly the same. If you want it, this would be separate. And if people have problems with taking instruction from the janitor..." Ben's smile was sharp. "Then they could find somewhere else to train." Rachel considered this as she resumed her cleaning routine. The offer was tempting, But it also meant stepping back into a world she'd left behind for good reasons. Coaching meant politics, meant managing personalities, meant dealing with people who thought they knew better than they actually did. But it also meant helping fighters like Amanda discover what they were truly capable of. "I'll give you an answer Monday," she said. Ben nodded. "Take your time. But for what it's worth, this place was better when you were part of it. Not because you were famous, but because you understood what the sport was supposed to be about." By Thursday, word had spread throughout Cliffside's community. Rachel Foster wasn't just cleaning the gym, she was available for specialized technical training. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Veteran fighters who'd been stuck at plateaus for months requested sessions. Amateur competitors preparing for tournaments wanted her defensive expertise. Even some of the boutique fitness members, the ones who usually avoided the serious boxing area, inquired about basic instruction. Rachel had to establish boundaries. Quickly, she would work with 8 students maximum, chosen not by their ability to pay premium rates, but by their genuine commitment to improvement. Sessions would be Tuesday and Thursday mornings, starting at 7 a.m. sharp. Anyone late would forfeit their spot to someone on the waiting list. The rules were non-negotiable, and that only made people want to train with her more. Her first official session was Tuesday, November 3rd. 6 students showed up: Amanda Peterson, 2 amateur fighters preparing for regional competitions, a middle-aged businessman who'd been boxing for years without proper instruction, and surprisingly, Marcus Grant. Marcus had taken 3 weeks to work up the courage to ask for a spot. His request had been humble, almost apologetic. He'd learned something about himself in that ring, about the gap between confidence and competence, and he wanted to close it properly. Rachel had accepted his request without reference to their previous encounter. Everyone deserved the chance to improve, especially people honest enough to admit they needed help. The session began exactly at 7 a.m. with basic movement drills. Number 2, punching, no sparring, just footwork and positioning. Rachel demonstrated each exercise with the fluid precision that had made her a champion, breaking down complex movements into teachable components. "Boxing is physics before it's violence," she explained as the group worked through defensive slides. "Master the physics and you might never need the violence." An hour later, all 6 students were exhausted but energized. They'd learned more about fundamental technique in 60 minutes than most had absorbed in months of previous training. Marcus lingered after the others left, toweling off sweat and gathering his gear slowly. "Thank you," he said quietly, for giving me the chance." Rachel was packing her focus mitts back into her cart. "Everyone starts somewhere," she replied. "What matters is what you do with the information once you have it." Marcus nodded and headed toward the locker room. As he walked away, Rachel called after him, "Marcus." He turned back. "Next session, we work on reading your opponent's tells. You've got good hand speed, but you're predictable. We can fix that." The smile that spread across his face was nothing like the arrogant grin he'd worn that first morning. This was genuine appreciation, earned through honest effort. Rachel finished securing her equipment and resumed her cleaning duties. The gym was busier now, filled with the usual mix of serious athletes and casual fitness enthusiasts. But something had shifted in the atmosphere, a new level of mutual respect. A recognition that everyone present was working toward some version of better. She'd found her balance. Not the champion she'd been, not just the invisible worker she'd become, but something new. Someone who could move between worlds, carrying knowledge from one to the other. Helping people discover strengths they didn't know they possessed. By Friday, there was a waiting list 20 names long for her technical sessions. Ben had offered to raise her rates, to capitalize on the demand, but Rachel had declined. This wasn't about money, it was about the sport. About passing on knowledge that would otherwise be lost. As she finished her Friday cleaning routine and prepared to head home for the weekend, Rachel reflected on how much had changed since that October morning when Marcus Grant had called her mop girl. The insult had been meant to diminish her, to put her in a box labeled invisible and irrelevant. Instead, It had reminded her who she really was. Rachel Foster, champion, teacher, custodian of both technique and tradition. Someone who understood that true strength often works quietly, that real skill doesn't need an audience, and that the most important victories happen when nobody's keeping score. Monday would bring new challenges, new students, new opportunities. To share the knowledge she'd spent years accumulating, she was ready for all of it. After all, she'd been training for this moment her entire life. By December, Rachel had transformed Cliffside Athletic in ways no one had anticipated. Her technical sessions had a 6-month waiting list. Amateur fighters from other gyms were requesting guest passes just to observe her teaching methods. Boxing. Forums buzzed with discussions about her defensive theories and training philosophy. But the real change was subtler and more significant. The gym's culture had evolved. People paid attention to each other now, really looked instead of just seeing uniforms or surface appearances. The casual mockery that had once passed for humor was largely gone, replaced by the kind of mutual respect that comes from recognizing everyone has something to offer. Rachel's dual-role custodian and coach had become a symbol of the gym's new identity. She still arrived at 6:23 a.m. with her squeaky cart, still maintained the building with meticulous care, but now she also commanded absolute attention during technical sessions, teaching champions and beginners with equal intensity. The transformation hadn't been without complications. Derek Collins, the young trainer who'd first asked for her help, had initially struggled with the arrangement. Having the cleaning lady demonstrate superior technical knowledge in front of his students was a blow to his ego that took weeks to process. But Derek was smart enough to recognize opportunity when it presented itself. He started attending Rachel's sessions as an observer, taking notes on her teaching methods and gradually incorporating her techniques into his own instruction. Within a month, his students were showing dramatic improvement. By December, he was confident enough to ask Rachel for private coaching sessions to improve his own skills. "I've been teaching boxing for 3 years," he admitted during one of their early meetings, "but I've been teaching it wrong. I want to learn how to do it right." Rachel appreciated his honesty. Too many trainers let pride interfere with learning, choosing to protect their egos rather than serve their students. Derek's willingness to start over, to acknowledge his limitations and work to overcome them, marked him as someone worth investing in. The amateur fighters preparing for regional competitions were Rachel's most dedicated students. 2 of them, Jamie Roberts and Michael Chun, had been struggling with the technical requirements needed to advance beyond local tournaments. Under Rachel's guidance, both had developed into legitimate contenders. Jamie, a 21-year-old college student, had natural athleticism but terrible defensive habits. She'd relied on speed and aggression to overwhelm less skilled opponents. But that approach had failed against technically sound boxers. Rachel restructured her entire approach to the sport. "Aggression without precision is just noise," Rachel explained during one of their sessions. "You have all the tools you need, we just need to teach you when and how to use them." Michael's problem was different but equally fundamental. He was technically proficient, but lacked the confidence to implement his skills under pressure. Years of conservative coaching had taught him to avoid mistakes rather than create opportunities. "Boxing is a conversation," Rachel told him as they worked through sparring scenarios. "You can't just listen at some point, you have to speak up and say something meaningful." Both fighters qualified for the regional championships in January, their first major tournament appearances. The success brought additional attention to Rachel's program and to Cliffside Athletic. But it was Amanda Peterson who provided the most satisfying vindication of Rachel's methods. Amanda had continued training with Rachel twice a week, while also attending Derek's regular classes. Her improvement was dramatic and consistent: better balance, sharper punches, more fluid defensive movement. But, more importantly, her relationship with the sport had transformed. She was no longer fighting against boxing, struggling to force her body into positions that felt unnatural. Instead, she was dancing with it, finding the rhythm that turned technique into art. Her confidence grew with every session, fed by the steady accumulation of real skill. In December, Amanda asked if she could spar with one of the amateur fighters. "I know I'm not ready for competition," she said carefully. "But I want to test what I've learned against someone who knows what they're doing." Rachel arranged a controlled sparring session with Jamie Roberts, who had excellent technique and the experience to provide a safe but challenging test. Both women wore protective headgear, and Rachel personally refereed to ensure proper safety protocols. The results were remarkable. Amanda didn't win. Jamie had too much experience and too many technical advantages. But she held her own, landing clean punches and avoiding most of Jamie's attacks through proper defensive positioning. More importantly, she never looked overwhelmed or intimidated. 6 months ago, Rachel observed afterward, "You would have been on the canvas in 30 seconds. Today, you made a regional-level fighter work for every exchange." Amanda's smile could have powered the gym's lighting system. The sparring session had been observed by several other gym members, and word spread quickly through Cliffside's community. The beginner who'd been crying in frustration 3 months earlier was now holding her own against legitimate competitors. It was validation not just of Amanda's hard work, but of Rachel's teaching methods and philosophy. Her approach emphasizing perfect fundamentals over flashy techniques, building confidence through competence rather than empty encouragement, was producing results that spoke for themselves. By year's end, Ben Torres was fielding inquiries from other gym owners about Rachel's availability for consulting work. Boxing publications wanted interviews about her teaching philosophy. A local television station requested permission to film one of her sessions for a feature about hidden champions in the community. Rachel declined most of the external attention. She wasn't interested in building a personal brand or becoming a celebrity coach. Her satisfaction came from the work itself, from watching students discover capabilities they hadn't known they possessed. But she did agree to one interview request. A boxing magazine was preparing an article about effective coaching methods, and they wanted to include Rachel's perspective on teaching defensive technique. The writer was respectful, focused on technical content rather than personal drama, and genuinely interested in the educational aspects of her work. "What's the biggest mistake most boxing coaches make?" the interviewer asked. Rachel considered the question carefully. "They try to teach students to fight like them, instead of helping students discover how to fight like themselves. Everyone's body is different. Everyone's mind works differently. Good coaching is about finding each person's natural strengths and building technique around those advantages." "And what about students who don't seem to have natural advantages?" "Everyone has advantages," Rachel replied firmly. "Sometimes they're obvious: speed, power, reach. Sometimes they're subtle at timing, spatial awareness, the ability to stay calm under pressure. A good coach finds those advantages and develops them into weapons." The article appeared in February, accompanied by photos of Rachel working with her students. The coverage was respectful and technically focused, emphasizing her innovative teaching methods rather than sensationalizing her story. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. Marcus Grant had continued training with Rachel throughout the fall, attending both her technical sessions and Derek's regular classes. His improvement was steady and substantial: better defensive positioning, more varied offensive combinations, increased ring awareness. More importantly, his attitude had completely transformed. The arrogant performer who'd once dominated gym conversations had been replaced by a serious student of the sport. He asked thoughtful questions, accepted criticism gracefully, and encouraged newer fighters instead of intimidating them. In January, Marcus asked Rachel if he could enter the regional amateur tournament that Jamie and Michael were preparing for. "I know I'm not ready to win," he said, "but I want to test myself against real competition. I want to see how much I've actually learned." Rachel studied him for a moment. The request showed genuine self-awareness, understanding his current limitations while still pursuing meaningful challenges. "You'll need to train harder than you ever have," she said. "Competition preparation is different from regular training. Are you ready for that level of commitment?" Marcus nodded without hesitation. "I've learned a lot about myself these past few months. I know the difference between real work and just going through the motions. Rachel approved his entry into the tournament. Over the following weeks, she pushed him through intensive preparation, technical refinement, strategic planning, mental conditioning. Marcus absorbed it all with the focused determination of someone who'd learned to respect both the sport and the process of improvement. The tournament was scheduled for March, which gave them 2 months to prepare. But already, Rachel could see that Marcus had found something he'd been missing. Not just better boxing skills, but a mature understanding of what it meant to pursue excellence through dedicated effort rather than natural talent alone. As winter turned toward spring, Rachel reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought her to this point. 6 months earlier, she'd been invisible, defined by others as nothing more than the woman who cleaned the floors. Now she was shaping the next generation of fighters while continuing to maintain the space where they all pursued their dreams. She'd found her perfect balance, respected for her expertise, valued for her contributions, but still able to work with the quiet focus that had always defined her approach to everything she did. The best victories, Rachel had learned, weren't always the ones that ended with your hand raised in front of a cheering crowd. Sometimes they were subtler, more personal, measured in the growth of others rather than your own achievements. Those victories lasted longer and meant more than any championship ever could. March arrived with the intensity of a training camp final week. Rachel's 3 tournament fighters, Jamie Roberts, Michael Chen, and Marcus Grant, had been preparing for 2 months under her guidance, each following individualized plans designed around their specific strengths and weaknesses. The regional amateur championships were held at the downtown convention center, a neutral venue that leveled the playing field between well-funded boxing programs and smaller gyms like Cliffside. 3 days of competition would determine who advanced to the state-level tournaments and, potentially, national recognition. Rachel had competed in this same tournament 4 times during her amateur career, winning it twice. Walking through the venue's corridors brought back memories of younger fighters. Different dreams, a time when her own success had been the only measure that mattered. Now her satisfaction came from watching others discover what they were capable of achieving. Cliffside Athletic had secured a small section in the competitor area, with Ben Torres handling the administrative duties while Rachel focused on technical preparation. The atmosphere was electric, dozens of gyms represented, hundreds of fighters warming up, coaches giving last-minute instructions in half a dozen languages. Jamie Roberts was scheduled to fight first, facing a veteran amateur from a gym in the state capital. Her opponent had a 15-3 record and a reputation for overwhelming newer fighters with aggressive pressure from the opening bell. "She's going to try to turn this into a street fight," Rachel explained as Jamie warmed up. "Fast combinations, lots of movement, trying to make you react instead of think." "That's exactly what we've been preparing for." Jamie nodded, her focus complete. 6 months of training with Rachel had transformed her from a raw athlete into a technically sound boxer. More importantly, she'd learned to trust her preparation instead of fighting against her own nervousness. "What's my job?" Rachel asked, testing Jamie's mental preparation. "Control distance, make her come to me. Counter when she overcommits," Jamie recited. "Box, don't brawl. And if she hurts you, cover up, get out of range, reset. Don't try to trade punches when I'm compromised." Rachel smiled. "Perfect. Now go show everyone what you've learned." The fight unfolded exactly as Rachel had predicted. Jamie's opponent came out aggressively, throwing fast combinations and trying to establish psychological dominance early. But Jamie was ready. She used footwork to control the distance, slipping punches and countering with precise shots that disrupted her opponent's rhythm. By the second round, the pattern was clear. Jamie was winning exchanges, landing cleaner punches, making her opponent work harder for fewer results. The third round was a clinic, Jamie controlling every aspect of the fight, while her opponent grew increasingly frustrated and desperate. When the judges announced Jamie's unanimous decision victory, the celebration in Cliffside's corner was restrained but genuine. One fight down, but this was just the beginning. Michael Chen fought 3 hours later against an opponent with superior credentials but questionable technical skills. This was exactly the kind of matchup that had historically given Michael problems facing someone whose reputation was more intimidating than their actual abilities. "You're the better boxer," Rachel reminded him during warm-ups. "You have better footwork, better defensive positioning, better punch selection. The only way you lose this fight is if you beat yourself." Michael's nervousness was visible but manageable. Months of confidence-building work with Rachel had given him tools for managing pre-fight anxiety, without letting it compromise his performance. The fight started cautiously, both boxers feeling each other out through the first round. But as Michael began to realize that his opponent's reputation exceeded his actual skills, his confidence grew. The second round belonged entirely to Michael's sharp combinations, excellent defensive work, complete control of distance, and timing. His opponent made a desperate push in the final round, throwing wild punches and hoping to land something dramatic. Michael stayed calm, used his superior technique to avoid danger, and finished the fight with a beautiful counterpunch combination that had the crowd on its feet. Another unanimous decision for Cliffside Athletic. Marcus Grant's fight was scheduled for the tournament's second day, giving him extra time to observe the competition and adjust his mental preparation. His opponent was a seasoned amateur with a 12-1 record and a style that emphasized constant pressure and volume punching. "This is going to be a test of everything we've worked on," Rachel told Marcus during their final preparation session. "He's going to try to overwhelm you with activity. Your job is to stay technical, pick your spots, and make every punch count." Marcus had been quietly confident throughout the tournament preparations, but Rachel could see the nervousness building as fight time approached. This was his first real test against legitimate competition, and everyone, including Marcus himself, was curious to see how he'd respond to genuine adversity. "I keep thinking about that morning in October," Marcus admitted as they walked toward the warm-up area, "when I thought I knew what I was doing, before I learned how much I didn't know." Rachel understood. That moment in the ring had been humbling for Marcus, but it had also been liberating. He'd stopped pretending to be something he wasn't, and started working to become something better. "Use that memory," she advised. "Remember how it felt to be overconfident and unprepared. Then remember how much work you've done since then." The fight began with Marcus implementing his game plan perfectly. He used movement to avoid his opponent's pressure, landed clean counterpunches, and showed patience when his opponent tried to force exchanges. The first round was close, but clearly Marcus's. The second round tested everything Rachel had taught him about mental toughness. His opponent landed a hard right hand that staggered Marcus and sent a shockwave through Cliff's corner. For a moment, it looked like the old Marcus might emerge the fighter who relied on ego instead of technique when things got difficult. Instead, Marcus showed the discipline Rachel had spent months developing. He covered up, moved out of danger, and reset his position without panicking. When his opponent pressed the advantage too aggressively, Marcus countered with a perfect left hook that reminded everyone why Rachel had approved his tournament entry. The third round was a masterpiece of technical boxing. Marcus controlled the distance, varied his attack patterns, and showed ring generalship that belied his limited competitive experience. When the final bell rang, there was no doubt about the outcome. Unanimous decision. Marcus Grant. As the Cliffside Athletic team celebrated 3 victories in their first tournament appearance under Rachel's guidance, the boxing community took notice. Veteran coaches approached Ben Torres asking about Rachel's availability for consulting work. Tournament officials complimented the technical improvement they'd observed in Cliffside's fighters. But the most meaningful recognition came from her own students. "6 months ago, I was crying in that ring because I couldn't throw a basic combination," Amanda Peterson said during the post-tournament celebration. "Today I watched 3 people I trained with dominate experienced competition using techniques. You taught all of us." Jamie Roberts, still glowing from her tournament victory, added, "You didn't just teach us how to box better. You taught us how to believe in our preparation instead of hoping for luck." Marcus Grant was quieter, but his gratitude was evident. "You gave me a chance to prove that I could become someone worth respecting," he said simply. That meant everything. Rachel felt the satisfaction that comes from work well done, from seeing potential transformed into achievement through dedication and proper instruction. But she also felt something else, a recognition that her journey had come full circle. She'd been a champion who'd walked away from the sport to preserve what she loved about it. She'd become invisible, defined by others as someone whose contributions didn't matter. Then she'd found a way to return that honored both her past achievements and her present circumstances. Now she was something new, a bridge between worlds. Someone who could move from cleaning the gym in the morning to coaching champions in the afternoon, carrying knowledge and respect between roles that others might see as contradictory. The tournament results would be forgotten eventually. New champions would emerge, new stories would be written, new underdogs would surprise established powers. But the lessons her students had learned about preparation, about respect, about the difference between confidence and competence would stay with them forever. As Rachel packed up the team's equipment and prepared for the drive back to Cliffside Athletic, she reflected on how much had changed since that October morning when Marcus Grant had called her mop girl. The insult had been meant to diminish her, to put her in a box labeled irrelevant. Instead, it had reminded her that relevance isn't determined by what others see when they look at you. It's determined by what you choose to do with the knowledge, skills, and opportunities you possess. Rachel Foster had chosen to do something meaningful with all three. 1 year later, Cliffside Athletic looked the same, but felt completely different. The boutique fitness section still gleamed with LED lighting and branded merchandise. The serious boxing area still hummed with the sound of gloves hitting heavy bags and feet dancing across worn canvas. But the artificial divide between the two spaces had largely disappeared. Rachel's influence had spread beyond her formal coaching duties. The gym's culture now emphasized mutual respect, technical excellence, and the understanding that everyone, regardless of their role or background, had something valuable to contribute. She still arrived at 6:23 a.m. with her squeaky cart, still maintained the building with meticulous care. But now her morning routine included checking the training schedules, reviewing video from recent sparring sessions, and planning technical instruction for the day's students. The dual role had become her identity, not a contradiction to be managed. Amanda Peterson was preparing for her first amateur tournament. Having progressed from tearful beginner to legitimate competitor in just over a year, her improvement exemplified everything Rachel believed about proper instruction. Steady technical development supported by growing confidence and genuine understanding of the sport. "I still can't believe how far I've come," Amanda said during one of their recent training sessions. "A year ago, I couldn't throw a basic jab without losing my balance." "The distance you've traveled isn't what matters," Rachel replied, adjusting Amanda's defensive positioning. "What matters is that you understand the journey never really ends. There's always something new to learn, something to improve." Jamie Roberts and Michael Chen had both qualified for national tournaments, representing the region with distinction even when they didn't win. More importantly, they'd become leaders in the gym, helping newer fighters develop the same technical foundations that Rachel had instilled in them. Marcus Grant had undergone the most dramatic transformation. His tournament success had been followed by steady improvement in both skill and character. He'd become one of Rachel's assistant instructors, working with beginning students under her supervision. "Teaching makes you understand your own technique better," he'd told her after his first month as an assistant. "When you have to explain why something works, you start to really understand how it works." Rachel had smiled at the observation. That's the difference between knowing something and understanding it. Teaching forces you to bridge that gap. The success of Rachel's program had attracted attention from throughout the regional boxing community. Other gyms sent trainers to observe her sessions. Boxing publications featured articles about her innovative teaching methods. A local university's sports science program wanted to study her technical instruction techniques. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. Ben Torres approached her on a Tuesday morning in late October, exactly 1 year after her first unofficial coaching session with Amanda Peterson. "I've been thinking about something," he said, settling into the chair across from her desk in the small office she now shared with the other coaches. "This gym is better because of what you've brought to it. Not just the coaching, but the way you've changed how people think about respect and potential." Rachel looked up from the training plans she was reviewing. "It's been good for me too. I didn't realize how much I missed teaching until I started doing it again." "That's what I wanted to talk to you about," Ben continued. "I'm 64 years old. I've been thinking about stepping back, maybe selling the gym to someone who can take it in new directions." Rachel felt a flutter of concern. Cliffside had become more than just her workplace, was the community where she'd rebuilt her relationship with boxing. "I want you to consider buying it," Ben said simply. "Full ownership, your vision, your rules. I'll stay on as much or as little as you want, but this place should belong to someone who understands what it really means." The offer was stunning and completely unexpected. Rachel had never considered gym ownership, had never thought about the business side of running a training facility. But as she looked around the space at the ring where she'd once been mocked and later reclaimed her identity, at the students working on techniques she'd taught them, at the community that had grown around shared respect for the sport, possibility began to make sense. "I need to think about it," she said carefully. "Of course, take all the time you need. But Rachel, this place was good before you got here. It's special now." That's not something that should be lost. Over the following weeks, Rachel considered Ben's offer from every angle. The financial aspects were manageable. Her savings from her professional career, combined with the gym's steady revenue, made ownership feasible. The time commitment would be significant but not overwhelming. More importantly, ownership would give her the platform to implement her vision of what a boxing gym could be, not just a place where people learned to fight, but a community where technical excellence, mutual respect, and personal growth were equally valued. She made her decision on a Thursday morning in November, exactly 13 months after Marcus Grant had called her Mop Girl. "I'll do it," she told Ben as they met in his office before the morning rush. "But I have conditions." Ben smiled. "I'd be disappointed if you didn't. We keep the cleaning contract in-house. I want to maintain that connection to the work that keeps this place running." "Agreed." "We establish a scholarship program for students who can't afford regular training fees. Technical instruction shouldn't be limited to people who can pay premium rates." "That's perfect." "What else?" "We create a formal apprentice program for developing coaches. Too many gyms rely on people who know how to fight but don't know how to teach. We're going to change that." Ben nodded appreciatively. "You've thought this through." "I've had a year to see what works and what could be better. This place taught me that you can honor your past while building something new. I want to make sure that lesson continues." The transition took 3 months to complete, with Ben staying on as a consultant while Rachel assumed full operational control. The changes she implemented were subtle but significant: upgraded equipment, balanced with preserved tradition, expanded programs that maintained the gym's technical standards, a scholarship fund that opened doors for dedicated students regardless of their economic circumstances. By March, exactly 1 year after her students' tournament victories, Rachel Foster was the owner and head coach of Cliffside Athletic. The gym that had once employed her as an invisible custodian now belonged to her completely. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, least of all, Rachel herself. On the anniversary morning, she arrived at 6:23 a.m. with the same squeaky cart she'd been using for almost 2 years. The wheels still needed repair. Her cleaning supplies still rattled against each other as she moved through the facility. Her employee badge still bounced against her leg with each step. But now the badge read, R. Foster, owner, head coach. And the morning routine included reviewing the day's schedule as both facility manager and technical instructor. As she cleaned the ring where Marcus Grant had once mocked her, and where she'd later reclaimed her identity, Rachel reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought her to this moment. She'd been a champion who'd walked away from the sport, an invisible worker who'd been dismissed and underestimated, and now the owner of the space where both transformations had occurred. The morning crowd began arriving at 7:15, the usual mix of serious fighters and fitness enthusiasts. But the artificial divisions that had once defined the gym's social structure were largely gone. People trained according to their goals and abilities, not their economic status or social assumptions. Amanda Peterson was warming up for a sparring session with one of the amateur competitors, her technique sharp and her confidence unshakable. Marcus Grant was reviewing defensive drills with a group of newer students, his instruction patient and technically precise. Jamie Roberts and Michael Chen were preparing for another tournament, their development continuing under Rachel's guidance. All of them had been shaped by the lessons Rachel had learned during her own transformation, that strength doesn't always announce itself. That skill develops through dedication rather than natural talent alone, and that respect is earned through consistent excellence rather than demanded through position or authority. At 8 a.m., Rachel began her first technical session as gym owner with the same words she'd used a year earlier. Boxing is physics before it's violence. Master the physics and you might never need the violence. But now the lesson carried additional weight. It wasn't just about boxing technique, it was about understanding that real power comes from knowledge, preparation, and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you're capable of achieving. Rachel Foster had mastered those physics in every aspect of her life. Champion, custodian, coach, owner, each role had taught her something different about strength, respect, and the difference between being seen and being understood. Now she had the platform to pass those lessons on to others, to create a community where everyone could discover their own version of championship, regardless of where they started, or what others assumed about their potential. As she watched her students work through their drills with the focused intensity she'd helped develop, Rachel knew she'd found her perfect ending. Not a conclusion, but a new beginning built on the foundation of everything she'd learned about turning assumptions into opportunities and limitations into launching points. The woman they'd once called Mop Girl now owned the building, trained the champions, and set the standards that defined excellence in her community. Some stories end with victory. The best ones end with transformation. Rachel Foster's story was definitely one of the best ones. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.